Oh, hello there. To start off, I'm going to share with you a quick anecdote. It's about 15, 16 years ago, I was starting to ski quite a bit. I'd grown up being a snowboarder and decided that if I wanted to spend more time in the mountains, that I should become a good backcountry skier. And a group of us took a avalanche training course in the Chic-Choc Mountains of Quebec. And so we're kind of heading up into the backcountry for a day of skiing, and there's a guide in the front and a guide in the back, and then the rest of us sort of in between the two. And I was kind of just behind the front guide. And I was really studying all of his gear. And I was looking at the skis he had, I was looking at his bindings, his boots. While we're sort of skiing, I asked him, I was like, hey, tell me about why you chose these bindings. And his answers were sort of sheepish. And then eventually came out, he's like, listen, we don't make a lot of money. And as guides, we get the stuff for either free or we don't pay a lot of money for it. It's called pro deals. And so there's an incentive for the manufacturer to give, it's like a sponsorship, to give the guide this gear so that little lemmings like us see it on the guide and we think, well, if it's good enough for the guide, it's good enough for us. And that's not untrue, right? Because the guide needs to know that I'm not gonna, whether I get free gear or not, I'm not gonna take gear that is garbage, right? It needs to work for me every day because I'm out here every day in these environments working. So there is some truth to that. But how easily we are influenced by that is something that manufacturers across the world with influencer culture have figured out very quickly, right? And we're not asking a lot of context when we ask, well, why do you use that thing? And what made you decide on why you use that thing? But going back into the topic, which is why or when your camera gear matters. Because I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's heavily dependent on context. What I want to do in this video is basically give you this sort of meta ability to scan all this information out there, all this advice about, what camera gear or what lenses or what gear of any type that you should have and how to come to your own decision. So I first want to start off by qualifying the word good. It's a really tricky word, man, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And the big challenge that we all face is that, and this is not me being a crazy socialist, but that the capitalist system is just built so that whatever you own today in 3 months is gonna look like a lemon in comparison to what comes out in 3 months. Technological advances, whatever. And so there's always this FOMO that what we have is just not good enough, and that we need something better. And there are times where that is absolutely true, depending on the context. The specifics around a lot of specs that, in terms of resolution, in terms of lens fidelity, a lot of those things for most people actually don't matter, especially if you're new. And why I say that is because most people who've been in this industry and the professionals have been shooting for 40 years or 20 years, they're not watching this YouTube video. You're watching this because you're trying to figure out for yourself, how do I make sense of all of this information online, all of this advice online? And my advice to you is it matters a whole lot less than you think. Technology matters a whole lot less than you think it does. I want to encourage you to think about this idea of what good is, right? And how important good is. Now, if it's important to you, if, for example, you have a lens that is a bit of an older lens, maybe the autofocus on it is the motors aren't quite so responsive and you want to shoot wildlife, for example, and it's a bit sluggish and you're not getting the shots that you want, then yes, having a better, more higher performing modern lens will assist you in that. In the very same way that if you want to shoot wildlife and you only have a 24-70 lens, there's only a certain amount of wildlife you're gonna be able to shoot with a 24-70. So yes, gear matters. Having a 400mm or a 600mm lens is kind of like the entry requirement to shoot wildlife because you're not gonna be able to get super close to them. So there are instances when gear is important. There are instances when high resolution is important, but not often for what you think. If you're just shooting photography, high resolution cameras, those above 23 megapixels are only really relevant if you are intending to super crop in and deliver multiple crops of the same image, or you're printing for like conferences and expositions where there's a banner display and you're standing right next to it and you've got to be able to see that the person's eyes and not just see like pixels. In those cases, yeah, high resolution matters. But how many of us are doing that? 23 megapixels, for as far as I can tell, will always be a lot. I have huge pictures printed in my living room that were shot with 16 megapixel and 22 megapixel cameras, and it's quite large. You wouldn't know the difference. I understand the irony here that I work for a retail organization, and so it's my job to actually convince you to buy things, and I'm not unconvincing you to buy things. I just would like to see that people understand that need and what makes something good for you or not isn't really something that you can always get from advice. It's kind of experientially based. And so you kind of have to just at some point commit to the process, buy something, and then through that experience, you will discover what part of these things, what part of these specs, what part of this performance is relevant to you and which isn't. And I struggle a lot with that on our channel because, again, my advice is my perspective, but it's not everyone's perspective. And that the only way you're really gonna know that the thing that I'm trying to sell you on is good for you is for you to find a way to get it into your hands somehow and try for yourself. Or just know what kind of person you are and know what you actually need and look at what I'm presenting and decide for yourself whether that's relevant to you or not. When someone says, oh, it's the best camera, I always ask, best at what? What do you mean by best, right? And you'll only be able to answer that question or be able to receive the answer to that question in a way that makes sense to you if you've gone on a journey yourself as someone using the gear and can say, yeah, that opinion, that doesn't really apply to me, right? I don't really care about that, right? If I shoot portraits, I don't need a 400 millimeter lens, right? It's ridiculous. Or everybody needs an 85 millimeter 1.2 lens. I've seen a lot of portraits that don't use an 85 millimeter ever. So that being said, the world is full of opinions, and the only way that you are ever going to wade through all of them is by having a strong opinion yourself and knowing if that opinion has any merit or not, and being able to answer the question to yourself, is this product the best for me? And that's all for today.